Hello and welcome. I'm so glad you could join us today because I've got a story you won't believe.
They were ready to tear the old school down by Friday. By Sunday, it would become the one place in town where broken kids and broken adults could still find their way back. This story is about second chances, quiet courage, and what can happen when one person decides that forgotten people still matter. Rachel Monroe arrived in Red Hollow, Kansas, with two suitcases, one tired 11-year-old boy, and a car that sounded like it might die right there on Main Street. The radiator clicked, the engine coughed, and when she pulled up in front of the only rental she could afford, a narrow white house with peeling paint and a porch that leaned a little too far to the left, she kept both hands on the steering wheel for a second longer than she needed to. Not because she was afraid of the house, because she was afraid this was it. This was what life looked like after everything fell apart. A year earlier, Rachel had been living in a cramped but decent apartment outside Chicago, teaching part-time art classes, packing school lunches, paying bills late but paying them all the same, and telling herself that surviving counted as living. Then came the divorce. Then came the legal fees. Then came the credit card debt, the panic attacks, the sleepless nights, the humiliating phone calls, the shrinking bank account, the look on her son's face every time he heard grown-ups whispering in the next room. By the time she crossed into Kansas, she wasn't chasing a dream. She was trying to outrun shame. Eli sat beside her in the passenger seat, skinny shoulders tucked into an oversized hoodie, one hand wrapped around the strap of his backpack, like he didn't trust the world not to take that too. He looked out the window at the town in complete silence. Red Hollow was the kind of place people in cities like to romanticize, and people who actually lived there knew better than to. There was a feed store, a diner, a hardware shop, two churches, one blinking traffic light, and a water tower standing over the town like an old sentry. It was neat in places, worn in others, proud in the way small American towns often are when they've been holding themselves together with habit, memory, and stubbornness for longer than anyone wants to admit. Rachel stepped out of the car and smoothed her shirt, though it did nothing to hide how exhausted she felt. The September air was dry and warm, with just the faintest bite of fall beginning to settle over the prairie. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. A screen door slammed. Wind moved through the cottonwoods with a soft, papery sound. It should have felt peaceful. Instead, it felt like being watched. Not in a cruel way, not yet. Just in that unmistakable small-town way where every stranger becomes a question before they become a person. A woman from across the street lifted two fingers in a polite wave, then glanced at the out-of-state plates. A teenage boy on a bike slowed down to stare. An older man sweeping the sidewalk outside the barbershop looked at Rachel, looked at Eli, then looked away with the careful neutrality of someone already making up his mind not to get involved. Rachel had seen that look before. It was the look people gave women they assumed had a story, and they were always right. She opened the trunk, one suitcase, then the other. Eli got out slowly and stood beside her. "You okay?" she asked. He shrugged. That was Eli's favorite answer these days. Not yes, not no, just something small enough to hide behind. Rachel nodded like she accepted it. Then she reached for a cardboard box full of kitchen things, and that was when she saw it. Up on the hill beyond the grain elevator, past a row of tired elm trees and a chain-link fence half-eaten by rust, stood an old red brick school building. Even from a distance, it looked abandoned. Tall windows, several cracked, front steps uneven, a bell tower without a bell. The playground out front was mostly weeds. The whole place leaned into the sky with the strange dignity of something broken that still refused to collapse. Rachel stopped moving. For a long moment, she didn't hear the traffic, didn't hear the wind, didn't hear the scrape of Eli dragging his duffel bag across the porch. She only looked at that building. Something inside her shifted. It was quiet, but real. Not hope exactly. Hope was still too expensive. This was something smaller, a spark, a pull, a feeling she hadn't trusted in a long time. Then Eli followed her gaze. "What is that?" he asked. Rachel swallowed. She looked at the boarded-up windows, the old brick, the dead grass, the hill nobody seemed interested in climbing anymore. And without fully understanding why, she said, almost under her breath, "I don't know yet." Then she picked up the box, walked toward the porch, and felt, for the first time in months, that Red Hollow might be hiding something the rest of the world had thrown away too soon. The next morning, Rachel woke before sunrise to the sound of the house settling around her. A soft creak in the hallway, a faint rattle in the kitchen window, the low groan of old pipes remembering how to work. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then she opened her eyes, saw the water stain on the ceiling above the narrow bed, and remembered Red Hollow all at once. The move, the rental, the silence in Eli's face, and the old red brick school on the hill. She lay still for a few seconds, staring into the dim gray light. Then she got up, pulled on her jeans and a faded denim shirt, tied her hair back, and went into the kitchen to start coffee in a machine that looked older than her marriage had been. The coffee came out weak. She drank it anyway. That, too, felt familiar. By the time Eli came in, rubbing sleep from his eyes, Rachel already had toast on a paper towel and a grocery store jar of peanut butter sitting open on the counter. "Morning," she said gently. He nodded and sat down. His hair stuck up in the back. His hoodie sleeves covered half his hands. "Sleep okay?" "Kind of. Kinda counts." That almost earned her a smile. "Almost." Rachel sat across from him, wrapped both hands around her mug, and glanced out the kitchen window. From there, she could just barely see the top of the old school building above the cottonwoods. Even half hidden, it tugged at her. Not loudly, just enough. Eli followed her eyes. "You're looking at that place again." Rachel exhaled through a small smile. "I know. It looks haunted. Most abandoned buildings do." "That's not a no." She laughed softly, and the sound surprised both of them. It had been a while since laughter came without effort. After breakfast, Rachel walked downtown to ask around about work, school registration, and anything else that might make them feel less like they were floating. Red Hollow was fully awake by then. Pickup trucks rolled past the grain co-op. Men in seed caps stood outside the diner with coffee cups in hand. A church secretary unlocked a side door with the purposeful energy of someone who had already been busy for 2 hours. Everywhere Rachel went, people were polite, friendly even, but careful. Small-town kindness had layers to it. On the surface, it offered pie, directions, and weather talk. Underneath, it measured where you came from, what had happened to you, and whether you were likely to stay. At the diner, she asked the waitress where she could find out who owned the old school. The waitress, a broad-shouldered woman in her 50s with bright pink lipstick and a name tag that read Donna, paused with the coffee pot in her hand. "The school up on Mercer Hill?" Rachel nodded. Donna tilted her head. "Why?" Rachel gave a small shrug. "Just curious." Donna poured coffee into a mug at the counter and lowered her voice the way people do when a town is about to speak through them. "That place has been sitting empty near 12 years now. School board shut it down after district consolidation. Kids got bused 20 miles over to Larkins. Building's been rotting ever since. Seems like a shame." Donna gave Rachel a long look, then set the pot down. "In this town," she said, "you'll find folks can live with shame a whole lot easier than they can live with change." Rachel let that settle. "Who has the key?" Donna wiped the counter with one hand. "If anybody still does, it'd be Walter Boone. Used to be caretaker there. Still lives out by the edge of Miller Road in an old trailer with a porch full of junk and wind chimes." "Is he friendly?" Donna barked out a laugh. "No, but he's decent, which matters more." Rachel thanked her, picked up a school registration packet for Eli, and stepped back into the sunshine. Miller Road curved past the edge of town where the pavement thinned and the houses spread out. The land opened into fields the color of dry wheat and late summer dust. She found Walter Boone exactly where Donna said he'd be. He was on the porch of a weather-beaten trailer, sitting in a rusted lawn chair, sanding down the handle of an old hammer like it had personally offended him. He looked up once when Rachel came through the gate. Didn't smile, didn't stand, just waited. "Mr. Boone?" Rachel asked. "That depends who's asking." "Rachel Monroe. I just moved into the Turner rental over on Maple." He grunted, which seemed to mean he had heard her. Rachel stepped closer. "I was told you might know something about the old school on Mercer Hill." Now he looked at her more directly. His face was sun-worn and deeply lined. His eyes were pale blue and sharp as tacks. "Know enough to stay out of it," he said. Rachel folded her arms lightly, not defensive, just steady. "I'd still like to see it." Walter rubbed the sandpaper down the hammer handle one more time. "You with the board?" "No." "Reporter?" "No." "Developer?" Rachel almost smiled. "Do I look like a developer?" Walter looked at her boots, her tired eyes, the loose thread at the cuff of her shirt. "No," he said flatly. "You look like trouble in a cheaper outfit." Rachel should have been offended. Instead, she found herself liking him a little. "I only want to look," she said. "That's all. Walter leaned back in the chair and studied her the way farmers study clouds they don't trust yet. Most people don't climb that hill unless they want to tear something down, he said. Rachel turned and looked toward town, where the top of the brick building stood above the trees. What if I want to remember what it was built for? That landed somewhere. She could see it. A tiny shift in his expression. Not warmth exactly, but recognition. Walter set the hammer in his lap. You got children? One son. He yours? Rachel blinked. Yes. Walter nodded once, as if that answer mattered for reasons he wasn't about to explain. Then slowly, with the weary reluctance of a man who had outlived several good decisions and most of his bad ones, he reached into his shirt pocket. A ring of keys clinked softly in his hand. He held it up between two fingers. Rachel's pulse lifted. There's one thing you ought to understand before I take you up there, he said. That building's not just empty. He looked past her, toward the hill. His voice dropped low. It's full of everything this town stopped wanting to carry. Rachel didn't answer right away, because somehow, deep in her chest, she knew exactly what he meant. And for the first time since arriving in Red Hollow, she felt certain of one thing. She had not come here by accident. Walter drove them up to Mercer Hill in an old pickup that rattled so hard over the gravel road. Rachel was halfway sure something would fall off before they reached the top. He did not say much. That seemed to be his way. One hand on the wheel, one elbow near the window. Eyes forward, Rachel sat beside him in silence while Eli rode in the middle, clutching the school registration packet in his lap like he still had not decided whether any of this counted as real. The hill rose slowly above town. From up there, Red Hollow looked smaller than it had from below. Smaller, quieter, almost fragile. The old school stood at the top like it had been waiting longer than anyone cared to admit. Up close, it was worse than Rachel expected, and somehow better. The brick was weather-worn and faded deep brown in places where rain had darkened it over the years. Several windows were cracked clean through. The front steps had sunk unevenly into the earth. One of the double doors leaned inward on tired hinges. Weeds pushed through the sidewalk. A rusted swing set off to the side moved a little in the wind, letting out the faintest dry squeak. Still, the building had presence. It had backbone. Even half forgotten, it looked like something built by people who believed it would matter for a long time. Walter killed the engine. For a moment, nobody moved. Then he took the keys from the ignition, stepped out, and said, "If you're hoping to be impressed, lower your standards now." Rachel got out and stood facing the building. "I'm not here to be impressed," she said. Walter gave her a sideways look. "That much, I figured." He unlocked the front door with effort. The metal groaned. The wood dragged across the floor. Then the smell hit them first. Dust, old paper, mildew, dry wood. And underneath it all, something faint and almost sacred, like chalk and floor wax and years of voices that had nowhere else to go. Rachel stepped inside slowly. Sunlight filtered through the tall windows in pale slants, catching dust in the air. The front hallway stretched ahead with rows of dented lockers, bulletin boards stripped bare, and classroom doors standing half open, like mouths frozen in unfinished sentences. Eli stayed close to her side. "Wow," he whispered. "Not scared, not exactly, just stunned." Walter shut the door behind them. "Roof still holds in most places. North wing leaks when it storms. Boiler's dead. Plumbing's worse. Gym floor buckled 3 winters ago." Rachel barely heard him. She was looking past the damage. A hand-painted mural still clung to one wall near the office. Faded blue sky, green hills, smiling children with paper kites. Someone had painted it with care once. In the main hallway, a row of student artwork remained pinned under dusty glass, construction paper curling at the corners, a papier-mâché moon, a watercolor barn, a crooked crayon drawing of a family holding hands under a bright yellow sun. Rachel stopped in front of it. The names beneath the pictures were still there, written in thick black marker. Tiny names, second-grade names, the kind written by children who assumed the world would make room for them. Walter watched her quietly. "Most folks come in here and see rot," he said. Rachel glanced back at him. "What do you see?" He looked down the hallway for a long time before answering. "I see where my wife taught 3rd grade for 22 years. His voice stayed even, but something in it changed. Not softer, deeper. That was the first real thing he had given her. Rachel nodded once carefully. They walked room to room after that. In the library, half the shelves still stood, though many had tilted. A few books were scattered across the floor. Eli bent down and picked one up, brushing dust from the cover with his sleeve. "Treasure Island," he read. Walter grunted. Library got cleared out in a hurry when they shut the place down. Some boxes hauled off. Some got forgotten. In the art room, Rachel stopped cold. Long tables, dry paint trays, a cabinet full of cracked clay tools, a sink stained with old color. The place looked abandoned, yes, but not empty. She stepped closer to the far counter and ran her fingers over a row of hardened paint jars. Blue, green, burnt orange, colors that had sat in silence for years. Eli watched her face. "You okay?" he asked. Rachel let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. "This used to be my favorite kind of room," she said. Walter leaned in the doorway. "You teach?" "I used to." "Used to is a heavy phrase." Rachel gave a faint smile. "Yes, it is." They made their way into the gym, where the afternoon light spilled through high windows and landed across the warped floorboards. The old stage curtain at the far end hung crooked, covered in dust, but still somehow proud. Rachel turned slowly in the middle of the room. She could hear it, not literally, but almost. Basketballs thudding, kids laughing, folding chairs scraping at a school concert, parents clapping too loud because their child had one line in a Christmas program. A place like this did not just educate children. It held a town together. And maybe that was why people let it die. Because losing a building was easier than admitting what had gone missing with it. Walter must have seen something settle in her face. "You're thinking too hard." He said. "No," Rachel answered softly. "I think I'm finally thinking clearly." She walked toward the stage steps, then turned back to him. "What would happen," she asked, "if somebody tried to use this place again?" Walter gave a dry laugh that held no humor. "The town would say there's no money, no point, no appetite for old dreams." Rachel glanced around the gym one more time, at the cracked varnish, at the folded silence, at Eli standing under a shaft of light with a book tucked under his arm, looking more awake than he had since they left Illinois. Then she said, "What if it's not about old dreams?" Walter narrowed his eyes. Rachel looked at the art room door down the hall, then at the library, then at the stage. "What if it's about the kids nobody's catching now?" That landed. Not all at once, but enough. Walter looked away first. Eli said nothing, but he did not have to. Rachel could feel it already. This was no longer curiosity. This was direction. And somewhere inside that worn-out building on the hill, among the dust and broken glass and leftover echoes of better years, an impossible idea had just taken its first breath. By the time Rachel, Eli, and Walter came back down from Mercer Hill, the sun had shifted west and laid a soft amber light across Main Street. Red Hollow looked the same as it had that morning. The diner still had trucks parked out front. The feed store still had seed signs fading in the window. A pair of boys still rode their bikes too fast past the church lot. But Rachel did not feel the same. Something had locked into place inside her. Not certainty, not yet, but purpose. And purpose, she knew, could carry a person a long way before certainty ever caught up. That night, after a supper of boxed macaroni and apple slices on mismatched plates, Eli sat at the kitchen table doing the kind of half-hearted math worksheet that told Rachel his body was present and his mind was somewhere else. She stood at the sink, hands in warm dishwater, staring out the dark window over the faucet. The reflection looking back at her seemed older than 34, tired around the eyes, a little thinner than last year, still trying to look steadier than she felt. "You're thinking about the school again," Eli said without looking up. Rachel smiled faintly. "Am I that obvious?" "You get quiet in a different way." She dried her hands and sat across from him. Outside, a pickup rolled past, slow enough to rattle the loose screen door. Inside, the kitchen light hummed softly above them. Rachel folded her hands on the table. "I keep thinking," she said, "about how many kids must have walked through that building when it was full. Not just for classes, for concerts, spelling bees, after-school stuff. Somewhere to be." Eli kept his pencil moving. So maybe a town loses more than bricks when a place like that closes." He stopped writing then, looked up at her. His face was still young, still boyish, but the last year had put a kind of guardedness in him no kid should have to wear. "Mom," he said carefully, "we can barely afford cereal people don't hate. What are you really talking about?" Rachel laughed under her breath, because he was right, painfully right. She leaned back in the chair. "I'm talking about maybe asking if the town would let someone use it." Eli stared at her for a second, then another. "For what?" Rachel let the idea come out slowly, the way you speak something fragile before the world has a chance to crush it. "For kids who need somewhere after school." He blinked. She kept going. "For art, tutoring, reading, maybe a place to sit and breathe if home doesn't feel easy that day." Maybe practical stuff too. Fixing bikes, painting, writing, building things with your hands. Real life things. Eli set his pencil down. You just got here. I know. You don't know anybody. I know that too. And people here already think we're weird. Rachel smiled. That part may be beyond repair. He almost smiled back. Almost. Then his face changed. What if they say no? Rachel looked at him for a long moment. Then she answered the only honest way she could. They probably will. The next afternoon, she found out just how right that was. The school board met twice a month in a low-brick municipal building behind the fire station. Rachel had borrowed a clean blouse from a neighbor named Louise and spent an hour rewriting her notes until they felt simple enough to sound true. She did not ask for money. She did not ask for promises. She only asked for permission to present an idea. That should have made it easier. It didn't. The room smelled faintly of old coffee, paper, and floor cleaner. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Metal folding chairs lined the back wall, half filled with townspeople who had clearly come for their own reasons and stayed because a stranger asking for something was better than television. At the center table sat Tessa Holloway. She was in her early 40s, polished without being flashy, with the kind of posture that said she had learned long ago how to hold a room before speaking into it. Her auburn hair was pinned back neatly. Her blazer looked expensive in the quiet, careful way of women who wanted to be taken seriously by men who still underestimated them. Rachel knew the type: smart, capable, efficient, and dangerous when they had already decided what mattered. Tessa listened without expression while Rachel explained her idea: a community learning space, a safe after-school place, programs for kids falling through the cracks, volunteer-based to start, weighing our art, reading, practical skills, mentorship. No request for town funding, only temporary access and the chance to prove the building could still serve the people it once belonged to. When Rachel finished, the room stayed still. Not hostile, not supportive, just still. Then a man near the back coughed into his hand and said, "Sounds expensive." Another said, "Sounds like babysitting with paint." A woman in a denim jacket asked who would handle insurance if a kid got hurt. One older farmer wondered why children needed a center when they had homes. Rachel answered each question as steadily as she could. She talked about working with volunteers, about limited hours, about supervision, about kids who did have homes, yes, but not always homes that felt safe, calm, or available. She did not oversell, did not beg. She had learned the hard way that dignity speaks louder than desperation, even when desperation is sitting right there in the room with you. Then Tessa finally folded her hands. "Miss Monroe," she said, her voice smooth and controlled, "I don't doubt your intentions, but this town has practical obligations. That building has structural problems, liability issues, deferred maintenance, and no operating budget. It is not a blank slate for personal reinvention." The words were polite. That made them sharper. Rachel kept her expression steady. "This isn't about personal reinvention." Tessa's eyes did not move. "No? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks a little like a woman who just arrived in town wants to rescue an old building so she can feel useful again." A few people shifted in their chairs. That one landed. Rachel felt it. Not because it was entirely false, but because it came too close to the part she had not wanted anyone else to name. For one brief, awful second, she saw herself from the outside. The broke single mom from Illinois, the tired blouse, the borrowed confidence, the impossible idea. She could have backed down right there. A year ago, maybe she would have. Instead, she drew one breath, then another. And when she spoke, her voice came out quiet enough that people leaned in to hear it. "Maybe I do want to feel useful again," she said, "but that doesn't make the need less real." The room went still in a different way this time. Rachel looked around at the faces watching her, at the men with calloused hands, at the mothers who looked tired around the eyes, at the older folks who had seen the town change in ways they never asked for. "I'm not asking you to believe in me," she said. "I'm asking whether anybody in this room has noticed how many kids are carrying more than they should, and how few places they have to set any of it down." No one answered, not out loud, but Rachel saw it in them. A flicker here, a glance there, recognition, discomfort, memory. Tessa tapped her pen once against the table. "The board is not prepared to approve use of the building at this time." There it was. Clean, official, final enough to sting. Rachel nodded once, because pride was sometimes the only thing a person could carry home with both hands. She gathered her papers, thanked them for their time, and walked out under the hard white lights, trying not to let anyone see that her heart was pounding, like she had just lost something she never actually had. Outside, the evening air felt cooler. The sky above Red Hollow was turning lavender at the edges, and the courthouse flag snapped once in the wind. Rachel stood on the steps with her notes clutched to her chest. For a moment, she let herself feel it. The embarrassment, the anger, the old familiar temptation to quit before failing more publicly. Then she heard boots on the concrete behind her. Walter Boone stepped up beside her, hands in his jacket pockets. He did not look at her right away. "Town meetings," he muttered, "have a way of making decent ideas sound foolish." Rachel let out a breath that was almost a laugh. "I think I helped with that." Walter turned his head then. "No," he said. "You helped make them uncomfortable. That's different." Rachel looked out toward Mercer Hill, where the top of the old school sat dark against the evening sky. The rejection still hurt, but beneath it, something else had begun to form. Something stubborn, something steady. Because for the first time, the town had not laughed her out of the room. They had listened. And sometimes in places like Red Hollow, listening was where the real fight began. Rachel did not sleep much that night. The town meeting kept replaying in her head. Tessa's measured voice, the tight faces in those folding chairs, the sting of hearing her own broken places named out loud in front of strangers. By morning, the hurt was still there, but so was the hill, so was the school, and so was the quiet, stubborn belief that some things were worth being embarrassed for. 3 days later, Rachel climbed the steps to Mercer Hill again. This time, she did not go alone. Walter came with a toolbox in the bed of his pickup. Eli came with a backpack full of snacks, a roll of trash bags, and the guarded expression of a boy pretending he was only there to help for 1 hour. By noon, they had opened windows in the front hallway, swept glass from 2 classrooms, dragged broken desks into a pile near the back exit. And for the first time in over a decade, the old school no longer looked dead. It looked interrupted. That Saturday, something unexpected happened. Sheriff Daniel Reeves showed up. He stood in the doorway with his hat in one hand and said, "Heard there might be tetanus and bad decisions up here. Figured I'd inspect both." Walter snorted. Rachel laughed. Daniel stayed. Then Louise from Maple Street brought a crock pot of chili and a box of cornbread muffins. Donna from the diner sent 2 old coffee urns and a stack of paper cups. By late afternoon, 3 high school boys were hauling junk out of the gym, and a retired librarian named Mrs. Corabell was sorting through books with a tenderness that made the whole room feel holy. Nobody called it a miracle. Small towns usually don't. They call it folks showing up. But Rachel knew better. Sometimes people don't change all at once. Sometimes they change one folding chair, one broom, one casserole dish at a time. A week later, the first unofficial afternoon opened with 6 kids. Only 6. One girl came because her mother worked double shifts at the nursing home. One boy came because home was too loud and nobody noticed when he disappeared for a while. Mia Carter came because she wanted to see whether Rachel would actually stick around when things got hard. Eli helped set out pencils and old sketch pads on the library tables. Rachel stood in the doorway for one quiet second and looked at those children scattered through that worn-out building. Heads bent over paper, knees tucked under chairs, voices low, safe enough to soften. And right then, she understood something simple and true. You do not have to save the whole world to change a life. Sometimes you just have to keep one light on. Word traveled fast after that. The board never formally blessed the project, but they stopped fighting it once the town began claiming it as their own. Even Tessa Holloway changed, though not all at once. She came one evening with a clipboard, ready to inspect the building again, and ended up standing in the back of the art room while Mia showed her a charcoal drawing she had made of the school on the hill. The drawing was rough, honest, beautiful in the way truth often is. Tessa stared at it for a long moment. Then she lowered the clipboard. After that, her voice in town meetings got a little less sharp, a little more human. By late October, someone painted a new sign over the front doors. Second Mile House. Not because life gave everybody a fair first chance, but because sometimes grace looks like a second mile somebody chooses to walk with you. On the first cold night of fall, Rachel stood outside the building as warm light spilled from the windows onto the grass. Inside, Walter was teaching 2 boys how to sand wood without rushing it. Mrs. Bell was reading aloud in the library. Daniel was fixing a loose hinge near the gym. Eli was laughing. Really laughing. With the kind of ease Rachel had not heard from him in over a year. She stood very still, hands in her coat pockets, and let the sound reach her. For the first time in a long time, she did not feel like a woman running from the wreckage of her old life. She felt like someone building a new one. And maybe that is the real lesson, isn't it? Sometimes the place people call finished, abandoned, too far gone is the very place where healing begins. So let me ask you, have you ever been in a season where your life looked broken from the outside, but God, grace, or sheer quiet courage was still building something inside you? And have you ever been the one person who showed up when someone else was close to giving up? If this story touched your heart, let me know in the comments. And if you believe forgotten people still matter, subscribe to the channel and stay with us for more stories about second chances, quiet strength, and the kind of hope that refuses to die.